One reason the Colts haven't taken huge swings this offseason is the guys they already have that people have disregarded. We're going to dive into those guys today and see if the Colts actually have a point. Let's get to it.
You are Locked On Colts, your daily Indianapolis Colts podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right. Thanks for tuning in and making us your first listen of the day. This is your daily podcast covering your Indianapolis Colts, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's show is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $150 win or lose. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. What is up, friends and family? This is Jake Arthur and Zach Hicks of horseshoehuddle.com. And today we are maybe shifting away from draft talk just for a day or so and kind of trying to look at this from the lens that the Colts are looking at, which, obviously probably the biggest hot topic among the Colts has been, I don't want to say inactivity in free agency because, yes, they have been very active in re-signing their own guys, but they just have not brought in new blood necessarily. And not that they haven't tried, but we know that they definitely do have guys on their roster that they like. They're always going to give reasonings of, well, we really like what we have. Like, I guarantee when we talk to Chris Ballard before the draft and we ask about why haven't you done X, Y, Z, he's going to talk about, we like this person, this person, this person. And we're going to talk about a few of them that Ballard is probably going to mention today. And so we're going to start out with Jelani Woods. We're going to talk about Dallis Flowers as well as a few, I guess, dark horse candidates to make a little noise this season. But hey, maybe they'll surprise us all and make more noise. So first, Zach, you and I, when mentioning Jelani Woods all offseason, we've kind of quickly skirted by it because the guy had just a freak scenario unfurl last year, back-to-back hamstring issues in each leg that cost him his entire season. When we talked to him on locker cleanout day after the Colts season ended, he basically was like, the specialist I was talking to said this was so rare that my specific case, what happened. But it was super disappointing because anyone who paid attention to the Colts, when you looked at breakout candidates, Jelani Woods was probably the most popular guy because, he had the perfect 10 RAS. He was at the time, came out and was like the most physically gifted tight end prospect we'd seen yet. And he made a lot of big splash plays as a rookie. But then he comes out and we saw him for like one or two practices in training camp. And then that was it. So how are you approaching the topic of Jelani Woods when it comes to this year?
Yeah, so we've talked about it quite a bit this offseason. The way that I've kind of approached it is Jelani Woods who, essentially. And it's not really like a shot to Jelani Woods or saying that Jelani Woods can't be a contributor. But when you have a player who in his second year of playing, he missed an entire season, I don't think you can really bank on him 100% being the guy that you drafted him to be. It's not that he can't be that guy. It's just, like saving a starting spot for that guy when all you've gotten so far are a couple flashes as a rookie and then nothing in year two. That's a little tough for me. So when it comes to draft plans or free agency plans, my approach with that was always don't consider Jelani Woods. And then if he does come back and he is that Jelani Woods you draft him to be, the more the merrier. You have all these guys that you like to play and can all get out there. But don't let the presence of Jelani Woods impact the way you draft or anything like that in terms of like, oh, we have Jelani, don't worry, because last year you didn't have him at all. And you don't know what's going to happen going forward. But as we get closer to draft and we're kind of moving out of the free agency portion and we're getting into the draft time and it's not a certainty that the Colts are going to draft a tight end, we have to start opening our eyes again to maybe the Colts see something that, I didn't, seeing something where it's like, look, Jelani Woods, we expect him back. We're fully confident he's going to be our starting tight end, whatever it's going to be. So, the perspective has to change a little bit the further we get into the offseason. You have to start acknowledging Jelani Woods a little bit more. Now, I still think that they might draft a tight end, come the end of this month here, but I don't think it's a certainty by any means. And if they don't take a tight end, then it is Jelani Woods' room. And he's presumably going to be the starter, the top guy. And we have to turn our attention back to what he did show us before, what he can show us, what he can do in this offense. But, my perspective on him is kind of changing throughout the offseason as we get fewer chances to get another body in here. So we'll see what happens after the draft. And if we have to really turn our attention to say, look, Jelani Woods is that guy at tight end, and we need him on the field this year.
Yeah, that's how I'm kind of seeing it as well. I think they have, some space for him allocated for what he's going to provide, because it looks like right now that he's going to be ready to go. He's posted some workout videos and we haven't heard anything to the contrary. And I believe he was getting closer as the season was wearing on. It just wasn't going to be enough time last year. So while I certainly think he's part of their future plans, just like you said, his presence alone is probably not going to be enough to prevent them from drafting even someone like a Brock Bowers in round 1, if that falls to them. Maybe even Jatavian Sanders or like Ben Sinnott. Like, I don't think tight end is a huge priority for them, because they also have Kylan Granson. They have Will Mallory that they just drafted last year. So I don't think the position is a big priority for them. But it would probably be foolish to, put a huge pause on acquiring someone because you've got this athletic freak who didn't get to play at all last year. So I totally agree. I'm very hopeful. And then just projecting forward, again, what we know about this situation basically is, until otherwise, he should be ready to go. And he's going into a Shane Steichen offense with a healthy Anthony Richardson as well, with Jonathan Taylor. So the passing game, there's going to be opportunities, because you still have to think defenses are going to be really keyed in to stop the run game.
Yeah, and one thing that I feel like we've included a lot with the Brock Bowers potential fit to Indy conversation, but we haven't included it with the Jelani Woods thing, because again, we've kind of been neglecting talking about Jelani Woods at this point because of the injury last year. But Shane Steichen-led offenses traditionally have had a workhorse tight end. You go back to his days with the Chargers and he had Hunter Henry. Hunter Henry was a target hog, a target machine there. Was getting a lot of production from that position. And then when he goes to Philly, he carries that production over to Dallas Goedert in that caliber of player. Now, again, it's a lot for Jelani Woods to get to the level of those two guys. Those two guys have been very good, very productive receiving tight ends for a couple of years now in the NFL. I mean, Hunter Henry has gotten multiple contracts out of his ability to be a receiving tight end. But, Shane Steichen likes to have that ball dominant tight end, that athletic tight end that can get open, find space, and be a reliable target for his quarterback. So that can be Jelani Woods. And if he's fully healthy and actually back out there this year, what Shane Steichen can do with him in the vertical passing game, with the pre-snap motion type game, with using him on RPOs just to draw attention of the defense, I think that's not something that we could sleep on here. I think that he can be a very good weapon in this offense. It's really just about, will he be out there? And by all the looks right now, it looks good. It looks good. He's doing the workouts. He's, posting videos, giving updates about his hamstrings and saying that he's good to go. So he should be good. It's just, we got to see it. We got to see it. I'm pessimistic by nature or something. Maybe it's covering this team for so many years now at this point. But I just want to see him back on the field. And if that's with him being the backup tight end or the starting tight end, whatever it's going to be, I'm excited for him to get on the field and show what he could do like he did as a rookie, because the traits are there. The flashes are there. What he can do in the passing game is very, very rare. And I want to see that with Anthony Richardson. So, I'm not closing the book on Jelani Woods by any means. I think he can be a valuable member of this offense. I just got to see a little bit first. Just give me one catch in training camp and I'll be all in. You guys know me. I'm pessimistic on paper, but then once I see like one highlight, I become the most optimistic guy there is. So I just need to see a couple catches with the rap in the background, just bomb productions or whatever, like they do with the draft prospects, and just do all that stuff for me and I'm good. That's all I need. And I'll be back on the train again.
No doubt about it. You are ready to be hurt again.
I'm ready to be hurt. I get hurt over and over again, Jake. I'm ready for it.
Yep, that's right. All right. So coming up, we're going to look at the defensive side of the ball and someone who kind of, I guess, had a similar scenario come up in Dallis Flowers. It's playoff time in the NBA and NHL. Baseball's in full swing, and FanDuel is your place to bet on every game. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $150 win or lose. Bet on everything from slap shots to home runs to dunks, all on an app that is safe, secure, and easy to use. Wednesday night, we've got Shea Gilgeous-Alexander and the Oklahoma City Thunder. 14.5-point favorites against Wemby and the San Antonio Spurs. That's a lot. It's a pretty big spread right there. So what are you waiting for? Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make your first bet an automatic win. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook.
Are you watching Fox Sports or ESPN on TV all day? Do you have to turn down the volume with all that shouting? Make the switch to Locked On Sports Today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel programmed for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. All right, Jake, we're getting into our next segment here. We're talking about cornerback Dallis Flowers. And, it's funny that we kind of lump these two guys together, him and Jelani Woods, but vastly different scenarios for these two players. Jelani Woods, top 100 pick, projected to be the starter going into camp because of that status, because of the flashes he showed as a rookie. Dallis Flowers was projected to be the starter last year too, and did start the first 2 games of the year for the Colts, but it wasn't with that draft status. We're talking about a former undrafted free agent, a guy who won that starting cornerback job in camp alongside Darrell Baker Jr. And, when Baker Jr. was having his struggles in those first couple of games, Dallis Flowers was playing fairly well for a pass defense that wasn't performing up to par. Like, it was a pass defense that was struggling early, but Dallis Flowers was doing some good things for the Colts. And it was really unfortunate to see. I think he went down in week 3 is what it was with the Achilles injury. So now we're getting into I think it's his 3rd season coming up, coming off an Achilles injury where a lot of his game is predicated on his athleticism and his ball skills. So he's a big question mark, but if he does come back to being what we saw early last season, what we saw in camp last year, this is another cornerback that we're not really talking about that gets lumped into that mix with Jalen Jones and Juju Brent. So, he's the true wild card for me. I think he's perfect for a show like this, for an episode like this, because he's an absolute wild card where it's like, look, if you get anything out of him and it's positive from him, that's a major home run, because he was a guy who was going to be a big factor last year, but you unfortunately lost him with that Achilles injury.
Yeah, I was really optimistic about Flowers because he didn't win every rep. There were some decent plays that he gave up, but he was always on. Like, you look at corners and you want them to be almost overly confident and have that short memory. And I feel like that's him. And he's aggressive. He attacks the ball, willing tackler. So I'm still really high on him. Obviously, you have to proceed with caution because the Achilles is a major injury. But I'm very curious to see, let's just say the Colts don't draft a corner that's supposed to start. And then you've got, right. And then you've got Flowers versus Jalen Jones. Now, of course, Jones maybe gets, the nod as with the first team reps going into camp. But I mean, Dallis Flowers won that job outright going into the season. So I'm very curious to see what his role would be. Now, if you throw that Quinyon Mitchell or like a rookie who is supposed to start, if you throw them into the mix, that kind of muddies things because they do really like Jalen Jones. But I'm curious because you don't want a guy like that to just totally fade away. He would probably become your Darrell Baker Jr. for, moving forward, which is, I would say, an upgrade probably. But no, I think the upside is still there as long as the Achilles hasn't just zapped his explosiveness, because between the ears, I think he's got the right mentality to make it. It's just all about physically if he still looks the part.
Yeah. And, again, this is not a guy who needs to start for him
No.
for it all to be perfect or whatever. Like if he's in that Darrell Baker Jr. role, that's a lot of snaps. Last year, that was a ton of snaps on this
Yeah.
defense
But
because of
by virtue of injury, of course. But
right. But that was a ton of snaps still, regardless. And that's what happens at the
yeah.
cornerback position. You need like 6 guys who can play, unlike last year where the Colts had like 3 that could play on here. But I do think it's worth noting when Chris Ballard talks about the young guys they have at cornerback. I think he mentioned at the very end of the season as well. It wasn't just Jalen Jones and Juju Brents. It was also Dallis Flowers mentioned in there. He's mentioned Dallis Flowers a lot by name as the guy they do value in this cornerback room. And I was actually looking at his pre-draft measurables the other day because I was just curious about, what the Colts were looking for in that undrafted free agent class. And it's not like he's a bad athlete or small or anything. Like he's like 6'1", like 190 something, 4'4", 10-10 broad jump. I think it was like a 6'6" or something like that in the 3-cone. Like this is a fantastic athlete. So
Hmm.
even if the Achilles like zapped a little bit of that, you still have like a great athlete. Like even if he's now like closer to 4'5" or something, like that's fine. Like I know a lot of his game is based on the athleticism, but he's still a really good athlete regardless. So I'm optimistic for Dallis Flowers. He's a guy who I remember when the Colts first brought him in. I didn't project him to make the roster his first year, and I believe he called me out on Twitter. So I'm supposed to have beef with him here, but I have no reason to. He's a good player on film. He does a lot of good things on film, and I like what he brings to this team. So even if he's not a starting corner next year, if he's your punt returner or your kick returner with the new kickoff rules and stuff like that, you have a positive plus impact player on your team. And that's what they were missing last year. Again, they didn't need him to be a starter last year. They just needed a guy of his caliber in that room, and they just didn't have that. So just having that impact back, if whatever version of it is from him coming back this next season is going to be an upgrade of what they had last year.
Yeah, and you mentioned the return ability, which of course is a fallback option for him. If he doesn't get very many snaps defensively, he's still a very talented return specialist, which of course you have to be physically capable of doing that as well. But I mean, he's going to be in that mix. We just know he is. And shoot, if you got he led the league in kickoff return averages at rookie. So if there was going to be a year for him to miss and not be able to do the kick returns, last year was it, because I felt like no one returned kicks ever. So that, he can maybe bring some juice in that department. But yeah, at the end of the day, you have a guy with good size. You mentioned he's about 6'1". He at one point had really good athleticism, and he has the right temperament for the position. And, he's got that fallback of the fact that he has been a highly regarded player in that room before. Like they're not going to just forget about him and drop him. I do think he factors into this group in 2024. There's just so much still to be known. What are they going to do in the draft? But again, if they don't, then I think he's very much in the mix to be that other outside starter.
Oh yeah. And I do want to lump Jalen Jones into this as well if we're talking dark
That would be the
horses.
battle. Yeah.
Yeah, if we're talking dark horse candidates and stuff like that, like those 2 players, I don't think either of them are bad. And I think that gets lost a little bit in the way that we've talked about this offseason with the Colts, because we don't want to go in the next season with them locked in as starters, but I don't think either player is a bad player. Like I think Jalen Jones, for the most part last year, if you're looking at what rookie corners typically do, he had a fantastic rookie season, because rookie corners typically struggle if you're not like a top 10 pick. We saw what Rocky Sin looked like his rookie season. We saw what Quincy Wilson looked like his rookie season with Indy. We saw what all these guys look like. I mean, Nate Hairston as a rookie in 2017 as well had to play a lot of snaps, and it wasn't great. Like we see what rookie cornerbacks look like. And honestly, Jalen Jones probably had the best rookie season out of all of those guys that I just mentioned. And he was a 7th round pick. We're not even talking about a top 100 or a top 50 pick, whatever it is. So I'm not out on Jalen Jones. I'm not out on Dallis Flowers. I want another body in there, and I still want a guy at like 15. But if they don't go with anybody high in this class, they just add more late round guys for competition. I don't think it means the Colts cornerback room is this ungodly mess that we can't rely on whatsoever. It's just that we need to count on more improvement and more steps forward. But it's not like that's unattainable for these guys. They were good players when they were on the field. It's just you got to see a little bit more to have success in today's NFL. But Yeah, Jalen Jones, Dallis Flowers, I do think we're sleeping on them a little bit, including myself, because, you get a little hyperbolic in the offseason when your team's not really doing too much and, to improve from the outside. But I don't think they're bad players by any means. It's just you want to see them take that next step. And if they have to start again, then you really hope they do take that next step. It's very paramount that they do. But coming up, we're going to go into some true dark horse candidates. These guys that we've talked about so far are starters or guys that could be starters. These next guys, not starters at all, but some guys to watch going into camp this offseason. All right, Jake, you put some good names on here. Some if you're a big draft fan, some of those names on here. If you're a guy who just loves bottom of the roster players and bottom of
That's
the
what the show
53.
was built on, though.
That is what this show was built on. The Locked On Curtis Brooks show is here to stay, guys. And first up, we got another player who missed last year with injury. I mean, gosh, we had so many guys that just did not play last season. Actually, most of this list is guys who didn't play last year because of injury. I just looked at all the other names. Yeah, all but one. But we're going to start with Evan Hull, running back, who was, I believe, it was a fifth or sixth round pick last year. I want to say fifth.
Might have been fourth or fifth.
Yeah.
One of the two.
I think it was fifth, but somebody will call us out for that.
Mid rounds.
Yeah. Later rounds, mid rounds, whatever it is. Evan Hull from Northwestern looked like he was going to be the passing down back. He got some run in week 1 last year, gets an unfortunate injury, which places him on IR. And then he just never returned from IR at that point. I know we got some updates throughout the year. It's like, okay, he was going to miss like 6 weeks. Then it turned into more than 6 weeks. And then he just never got activated throughout the season. So, Hull's a guy who he could realistically get cut this offseason if he doesn't come back to full strength. But if not, I mean, look, he's got the passing game chops. He showed the pass blocking ability in the preseason. There's a couple clips of that stuff where he was doing really good at that. He's got the vision. I mean, this looks like he could be your RB 2 or 3 next year if he's able to get back to full strength going into training camp.
Yeah, let's say the Colts don't add a running back that's like the unquestioned backup behind Taylor. I think it's wide open. And just from watching him, like you mentioned, he season ended in week 1, so we didn't really see true gameplay. But he had a great offseason last year. I remember during rookie minicamp, him and Josh Downs were like easily the standouts of the weekend. And then you go into training camp and he's working really hard. He's catching balls. You can't really judge running between the tackles and everything during camp, but I thought he looked really good all offseason. And I mean, right now you have Trey Sermon and Tyler Goodson and Xavier Scott along with Hull behind Taylor. So that's still wide open. And when you're a guy who has an ability to catch the ball, which the Colts, when Taylor's not out there, they use that as an extension of the run game, getting those quick passes out. And I think he can do some good things in pass protection as well. I mean, the more abilities you have, the less likely you are to leave the field. And I mean, knock on wood, but Jonathan Taylor didn't have the cleanest bill of health the last couple of years. So you look at a guy like Evan Hull who has 3 down abilities, but maybe in unspectacular fashion, and you could carve out a role. I mean, the knee obviously has to check out because it's a meniscus, which is not considered like a serious knee injury, but at the end of the day, he was not able to return last year. So hopefully good things from Hull this year. Moving further down the roster, we got a trio of edge rushers on this one. Jannard Avery, who was a veteran that the Colts signed last summer, he had a knee injury as well, suffered during either camp or the preseason, didn't get to play at all. Titus Leo was placed on IR right before the season as well. Rookie, only the second ever draft pick out of Wagner. And then Isaiah Land, who the Colts did pick up, and he got some rotational run, but was often a game day inactive. But still, I think he wound up with like a half sack or a whole sack. But he was the type of guy who would get occasional pressure and get in for a half a sack. But he was kind of a sneaky kind of Twitter darling prospect last spring. Athletic guy who fits. Was he in Build a Ballard for edge rushers last year? If I don't know correctly.
He might have been in Build a Ballard. I know when I listed small school guys that fit the Colts, he made that one.
Yeah.
And he was in the top 10 for that one. So Yeah, he was definitely someone on my radar. Had a ton of sacks at Florida A&M. I want to say he had like a 20 sack season there or something at Florida A&M.
Damn. All right.
Yeah. Yeah. But yeah, no, these three guys are interesting because they're all kind of competing for one spot. It's going to be that final rotational edge rusher that's mostly going to be a game day inactive, but can occasionally, get some run on defense like Isaiah Land did last year. Titus Leo's a guy they really, really liked last year in the draft. Unfortunately, got hurt. Jannard Avery, they re-signed him this offseason to add another veteran to that rotation. And then Isaiah Land, again, you saw what we saw last year. The Colts kept him around for a reason, and I think they do like him. So three guys that are going to be competing for a small role in the team, and maybe if there's an injury in front, it could turn into a bigger role. But I do think they like all three of these guys, and we'll see what they can do in camp.
I think that's actually, you just mentioned it, important to mention is Jannard Avery was re-signed to this offseason.
Yeah.
So he has a knee injury that ends the season before it begins last offseason, becomes a free agent this spring, but they thought enough about him to bring him back. So they clearly think medically he'll be fine and that he can contribute. So yeah, like you mentioned, this is basically the Jake Martin role. Isaiah Land was able to be inactive for some brief times last year. But yeah, this is the final designated pass rusher role. Last up, this is a guy that both you and I like. This is a guy that Chris Ballard really likes, Daniel Scott, the safety. I think it was out of Cal last year. So he had I think it was an ACL. This was a guy who you look at him, you immediately think core 4 special teamer. But anytime you mention that, I asked Chris Ballard about him. I think after the draft, he was like, don't discount this dude's ability to play safety for us too. So this could quietly be a guy who they have in their plans to contribute at safety. Now, I think they have bigger plans for the group as a whole, but I think they would be fine with him contributing.
Yeah, I think for me, he's more of a strong safety, which kind of adds to, okay, all of the guys we have right now are strong safeties
Right.
except for Rodney Thomas. So we'll see what happens at that. But yeah, Daniel Scott, when his injury happened last year, I was really bummed out because he was a guy I was really excited for. I loved his film. He was the day 3 guy that I had the most optimism for in year 1. Like I had Adetomi was like my guy going forward, but Daniel Scott was the guy in year 1 where I was like, okay, this is going to be the biggest impact player they took on day 3. And unfortunately he went down with that ACL injury, but I love his ability as a slot defender. I love his ability to come down and fill in the run game. Supreme athlete, like just a fantastic athlete, can be a core 4 special teamer. And like Ballard said, I do think he can do some things on defense. So, again, I'm not going into this draft saying I don't need a safety. I have 25-year-old rookie Daniel Scott coming in. I don't need that by any means, but I do think he can do some good things for you. I think he can be like a George Odom type player for your team where it's like, hey, when he gets on the field on defense, he's doing some good things for your defense, but for the most part, he's going to be just a fantastic special teamer for you. So yeah, I don't anticipate this being something where it's like at the end of the year, we're looking at Daniel Scott and being like, never mind, we don't need another safety. We have Daniel Scott and Nick Cross. Those guys are locking it down. I don't think it's going to be something like that, but I do think Daniel Scott has the potential to surprise a little bit this next season and maybe get some run on the defense and do some good things out there. Just really good college film, really good ability on defense and special teams, a lot of experience doing everything. And I think that's going to be very valuable to a team that just needs more bodies at safety right now.
Yeah, and like we mentioned at the top, none of these guys in any of the 3 segments are going to prevent the Colts from drafting someone to compete with them by any means. But Jelani and Dallis are obvious examples of guys who are in the Colts plans, and as long as they're healthy, will contribute in some way. But when I look at the roster, I really am intrigued by Hull, Scott, and then the pass rush trio that we mentioned. I mean, I think at the very least they'll have productive camps and make things interesting and get some people talking about, do they make the roster? Like, do they knock this veteran off the roster? Like, that's the vibe I'm at least getting from that group.
And don't sleep on Ashton Doolin. No. If we're listing all the guys who got hurt last year,
Ashton has circumvented this whole conversation, and we wouldn't dare sully his spot on the roster. He doesn't factor into this because as long as we are living and breathing, he will be a Colt. That's why.
Ashton Doolin for me will always be the boy who lived. Ever since he joined the team as an undrafted free agent, he's been on the chopping block. He's been on the 53 roster projections, always been on the cut line every single year for everybody's projections. And now I think he's like, okay, look, he's staying. He's sticking.
Mhm.
Nobody can beat him. Mike Strong can't beat him. Desmond Patman can't beat him. Nobody can beat him. He's making the roster. But now he's locked up. So of course he's making the roster.
Right.
Before we get out of here, though, guys, I do remind you the Indy Draft Guide is officially here. For $8.99 with code DRAFTMAS, you get access to an essential piece of reading for Colts fans, both before and after the draft, featuring 225 in-depth scouting reports, features, and much more. Click the link in our show notes to order today. Again, it is out, guys. Let us know what you think. It's been a really fun time getting it out and seeing the responses so far. And let me know what you think of the guide. It's a lot of work that goes into it. And just shout out to everybody who contributed on that right there. And if you guys don't already make sure you follow at Locked On Colts, at Jake Arthur NFL, and at Zach Hicks 2, all on Twitter. Also subscribe to our podcast on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcast. We love you guys, ratings, reviews, and we'll catch you guys back here tomorrow afternoon.